They were people just like us, doing the most innocent and human of things, eating with family at a restaurant, working in a pizzeria, cheering at a football friendly, having a drink with friends in a bar, singing and dancing at a rock concert. Then evil struck, and the beautiful city of Paris was defaced by violence and gore. 132 dead so far, 350 injured, many of them critically. This was an attack on innocent human beings. It was an assault also on humanity, on every aspect of human flourishing, human life and health, family and friendship, work and leisure, freedom and security, on truth and beauty and goodness. It was an assault also on religion. For to attack everything good, everything sacred, is to attack the God who gives us such things. To add insult to injury, to add blasphemy to insult, Daesh claim to do such things in God's name. The world looks on appalled, vulnerable, grieving. We know this evil is not localized to one city only. Before the Paris atrocities, in the same 24 hours of blood, a suicide bomber in that Paris of the East, that is Beirut, killed 43 and injured 250. Another in Baghdad killed 18 people at a funeral and injured 41. Sydney now joins Paris in horror, even as Paris joins Beirut in grief. We've lit our opera house in the tricolour of France, in solidarity, in grief and determination. All that is best in French civilization, including its deep Christian roots, cries out for better than this. It cries out for a world in which people may flourish in genuine liberty and equality and fraternity. A world in which people are not merely left alone to flourish, which is already more than the black-flagged haters will allow, but where people are actually assisted to flourish, as the red, white and blue promise. The merchants of terror may care little for life and liberty, family and friendship, truth and beauty, faith and goodness. But we will never repudiate these things. Indeed, we recommit to them this night. When I contacted my friend, Cardinal André Vantois, the Archbishop of Paris, to express heartfelt condolences on behalf of the Catholic people and all friends of France in Australia, and to promise this Mass tonight with civic and religious leaders and people, for the repose of the dead and the healing of the living, His answer to me was very simple. Others have suffered too. These horrors we are experiencing will only deepen our commitment to a faith that unites rather than divides, to ideals that build peace. In my exchange with Cardinal Vinteuil, I noted the perversity of these attacks occurring in the very week the French people celebrate Martinmas, their national feast, which is also Armistice Day. Who is this Martin they celebrate? Named for Mars, the Roman god of war. He was a 4th century Roman cavalry officer from a long martial line. As a young man, he hoped to find glory and contentment in great military victories. But God had other plans for him. One cold winter's day, he happened upon a naked beggar and was moved to cut his cloak in half and share it with him. That night, Jesus appeared to him in a dream, telling him that he was that poor beggar Martin had clothed that day. Martin became convinced he must renounce the soldier's life and embrace poverty and peace. Providentially, his feast day would one day be Armistice Day. But for now, he was court-martialed for his pacifism. Even as they imprisoned him, his commanders knew this was no cowardice. For Martin had offered to lead the troops into battle while himself unarmed. Often it is those who work for peace who have the greatest fortitude. Eventually discharged, he sought baptism and a more irenic existence as a monk. As a middle-aged man, Martin hoped to find peace and contentment in his prayers. But once again, God had other plans for him. Against his will, the locals elected him Bishop of Tours. Lured to that city on the pretext that someone close to death needed his prayers, he was taken in chains on arrival to the Cathedral and ordained bishop. Resigning himself to his new fate, Martin brought to church governance his military ability to lead and organise men, and his monastic ability to calm and coax them. While the Spanish bishops, led by Bishop Ithacrius, thought unbelievers and heretics should be threatened, Martin insisted the Christian way must be peace and persuasion. He joined St. Ambrose of Milan in excommunicating not the Priscillian heretics with whom he disagreed, but the Christian fanatics who wanted to coerce them. A story is told of Martin's contest with the Roman emperor. Valentinian had forbidden actors to become Christians, as he feared losing them from the stage. When Martin stormed into the palace, unannounced, the emperor refused to rise and acknowledge him, this uninvited guest, let alone to give him a hearing. Martin prayed, and the emperor's seat caught fire. forcing him to rise from the hot seat. Preferring an unburnt rump to the company of comedians, he granted Martin's demand that those on stage might become Christian. It's an amusing story, but one that shows how divine grace gradually, if sometimes only gradually, tamed and redirected this man's fighting spirit. He turned from building the emperor's kingdom to building God's, from physical warfare to spiritual, from the violent pursuit of wealth and power to the gentle love of poverty and persuasion. Having submitted externally to the Prince of Peace, Martin was gradually to experience a transformation within. And so by the end of his life, Saint Martin had become the gentle, courteous, humble man the Christians of France liked to remember. The story of the patron saint of France shows change is possible in individual human hearts until person by person, whole empires are converted from conquest to peace, from hate to love, from violence to respect. Australians fought beside Frenchmen in a great war on their soil they hoped would end all wars. Sadly, we were in the trenches with them again only decades later. The slaughter in those wars is unthinkable. But humanity, long mired in a cycle of extermination and recrimination, was not ruined forever. Nations were eventually driven to the treaty table by sheer exhaustion as much as anything else. And by divine grace and human goodwill, some became peacemakers, builders of that true armistice that is the life of the Beatitudes. To mark the St. Martin's Day armistice, many people wear poppies. The anguished poem of a Canadian colonel, John McCrae, about the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915, described the poppies in Flanders Field, bloodied floral tributes on the graves of countless soldiers, silent memorials and prayers for peace. Now these November poppies we wear will have an extra resonance. They will recall not only those who fought bravely in public wars, but also innocents slaughtered by cowards in private ones. As Paris squares are bloodied like Flanders fields, we must continue to build places of concord. Pray for Paris, pray for peace, are popular hashtags in the wake of these atrocities right now. We believers must insist that to call on the name of God is to call on the transcendent source of peace, reconciliation, and goodness. Like Martin of Tours, like Jesus who beatified the gentle, merciful, pure-hearted, and peacemakers. Whatever our faith or politics or national affinity, we must all speak out in favour of peace and love and life, and condemn vicious and lethal parodies of religion or politics or culture. We must all pray for such courage for our civic and religious leaders. And we must ensure that the life of football and cafes and concerts returns to the streets of Paris and Beirut as Isaiah dreamed it would for all humanity in the end. That banquet of rich food, no doubt French food. With Paul, I am certain that nothing can really come between us and the love of God, even if we are anxious, persecuted in want. Indeed, even if we are attacked. For these are merely the trials through which we triumph by the power of Him who loved us, of Him who is love incarnate. And blessed, he says, are the peacemakers, for they shall be called God's children. Amen.